Yo guys, Theo here on Common Sense. Welcome to another episode of Human Beings. You guys know the format by now, the podcast when we're interested in individuals, not just what they can teach us today, who they are today, but how they ended up that way, the alchemy of said person. Today I'm joined by my friend Odysseas. We talked a little bit,
guys.
Yeah, we talked a bit about how to introduce you, and holistic physical therapist is something we concluded would capture some aspects at least. But, well, first and foremost, hello and welcome, Odysseas.
Good to be here, and this podcast, so we've been talking for a while to do this, so it's exciting to finally do it.
Yeah.
I mean, we know each other for the past 4 years or so now, and it's an exciting opportunity to sit down in this very beautiful landscape in Bavaria and discuss some interesting subjects.
Absolutely.
So yes, I will agree that the title holistic physical therapist is something appropriate to what I do, the way I approach my profession and my philosophy in life. Although I do have a degree as a physical therapist, as this conventionally understood, I always had this sense about what a physical therapist is, which is more aligned to the philosophy of Hippocrates.
Mm-hmm.
The holistic philosophy that saw human being as an anthropos, meaning not in a fragmented way, which usually in contemporary scientific health sector does, at least in the West, but as an integral holistic whole, as even a microcosmos, a micro-universe. And I think this approach aligns perfectly with your spirit, and this is one of the main incentives of how we met initially in Greece.
Yeah, absolutely. I was thinking, I think we'll tell the story about how we met each other in a bit, but that was one thing that was mentioned to me before I met you. The people that I met you through, kind of, they kept saying that, oh, you should meet our friend Odysseas, you're really a lot like him. We'll get to that part later, but yeah, I of course know a little bit of your background, but not too much, and that's the interesting thing with this podcast too. It's kind of interesting to get to know that I personally get to know a person better, but in a format that will actually capture the conversation also. But I always say that I'm interested in what built a person, sort of what led to what we see today, kind of. And so
you know what, here, just to add something to that.
Yeah,
Obviously in your podcast there's no script.
yes,
Deliberately. And I like that, and you're interested in hearing what I'm going to say. I'm also interested in hearing myself, what I'm going to say, as an answer to your questions. So
no, that is interesting, actually, because
it's an exploration for me as well.
Yeah, but it is because I tell my story many times over and over for my videos, but it's always interesting when I'm being asked about it by someone else, also in this kind of format, because just someone else directing the conversation and asking, you might come at it from a different angle, or you might have to think of it in a different way or something. So it's I see what you mean completely. But so I always say that, you decide just how personal you want to be, but I want to know a little bit about, where did you grow up? What was kind of your family situation? Were there any significant events or kind of just circumstances that you feel were significant in shaping you? And then, of course, because I think you also weren't always into just training and the physical, so I'll be interested to hear how you kind of got into that as well. But if you just go all the way back to the beginning, and we'll see where we end up.
All right. So I grew up in Glyfada. That's a southern suburban area of Athens in Attiki. I grew up in a middle-class family, and despite my family not being that rich when it comes to the economical wealth we had, we were rich in a very special way, and I will say there was intellectual richness in my family, in the sense that my family was completely not dogmatic. Although Certainly my mother and my father had certain beliefs when it comes to their worldviews. Nothing was imposed on me and my older brother. There was always this sense of freedom where we could just discuss whatever there was inside of us as a belief or as an idea. We would contemplate, and not only that, we would debate about those ideas. And although during that time it felt natural for me to sit down at the family table with my father, my brother and my mother and discuss about various subjects, whether it was related with religion or politics or something about the human body. And it will be discussed in the context of anything goes. You can say whatever you want, but if you are to say something, you have to back this up with some form of argumentation. It's like you can say anything, but present in a stupid way. And I found that natural because of my family upbringing. But as I grew older, I realized how special this was. Especially in modern day society, where it's just so hard to express your inner world, let alone general ideas, in a way which is genuine and not trigger to the company you are with or to the one you're discussing with some kind of negative emotional response, and just discuss ideas without fear. That's very special. And if I am to be grateful for one thing regarding my upbringing, I would choose just that, the gift of having a family space where we could just express ideas in a free way. And another thing which I realized while I was growing up is that this is basically the foundation of true philosophy. I mean, sitting down and discussing about principles, about the thoughts you have, argue about ideas in the way I described before, in a free, non-fearful way, backed up with argumentation, is basically dialectics.
Yeah.
So that's one thing that comes up in my mind when I'm asked about my upbringing. The other thing which comes to my mind is, of course, the Greek landscape itself. If I am to formulate an image with my mind's eye regarding the Greek soul, the Hellenic soul, what I see is a vast sea filled with light, islands decorating the vastness of that sea, and just the bright sun pouring down its sun rays into the earth. And of course, in the horizon, multiple mountains. And there's a certain beauty into that, which is not just the exterior beauty of the form, of seeing this combination of elements. It inspires the soul in various ways. And in my case, at least, whenever I think of the aesthetics of the Greek soul, is that it inspires me to expand, to expand my awareness in an unceasing expansion, to grow my awareness in an unceasing expansion in a way which accepts diversity, because one thing about this landscape is it has unity in diversity. There are many elements which blend into one, compared to other landscapes of other countries where there seems to be a monomorphic image in the landscape. For example, in Germany it's very beautiful, but even Germans will admit that there's not too much diversity. That's not the case with Greece. And I think, to make this presentation a bit brief, is that I think that unity in diversity and the sense of expansion has been imprinted on my soul in part due to the landscape itself of Attiki, of Greece.
For sure, and that's all great. But so also what I want to know kind of is that, you know, many people that we see today, they are quite well put together, I would say, and there's quite a clear person now. Often the road there wasn't just like a straight and easy path to walk, you know. So I guess what I'm also, that's great to give like a sense of kind of the atmosphere around you. But did you have a time when you were younger, when you would say, to put it simply, when you were a bit more like troubled or something like that? We would think mental health, that kind of thing. Because, you know, that was definitely the case for me, that I was, you know, I had a tough childhood and I ended up kind of just wandering aimlessly through life, and I was partying, having different vices and stuff, and I had this big crash after which I completely changed, you know. So I guess I want to know, did you have, not the same thing, but when I say that, like what comes to mind for you? Did you go through something like that?
Well, my childhood in general was good. I want to say it had many negative elements. The main trouble I had was connected with my integration in the wider social whole of me being at the school. I had few friends, and many times I just would feel that I was seeing the world in a quite radical way compared to the children of my age, most of the children at least. I could not really fit in with what was popular. I always felt that there was some sort of inauthenticity of what they were doing.
Yeah.
And although I don't want to be too judgmental about it, like every person can do whatever he or she wants, I always just felt that people just conform to some sort of collective consciousness in a subconscious way, like they don't even think about it.
Yeah.
And I was able to pick that up intuitively at the beginning as a child. So I had some troubles there. You know, if you stand out in some ways while you are a child, you're targeted in some ways. I mean, I was bullied some years of my life as a child, and in part, my bullying was also associated with my stature, which was I was small, right? And
what kind of bullying was that? Just to be a bit concrete, you know.
Well, calling names mostly. Yeah. In early high school, there was a time also there was a kind of physical bullying as well, and I think it's natural to say that this was also part of my incentive to go into physical training. And that's interesting because when I began being a bit stronger, I also bullied myself, some other you know, peers. So it's interesting to see like the cycle of karma, right? And how we go through phases in life that make us more mature. So yes, I would say that was one difficulty, and the difficulty about not being integrated into a whole, that I always tend to see things in a, I won't say special, but in a unique individual way, is something which I still face to this day.
Oh yeah, I think we're quite alike in that way.
I believe so. And that's why we can connect, perhaps in a meaningful way. I believe it's a meaningful way. And but obviously now that I'm an adult, I can handle this far more skillfully. It does not upset me as much. But if you are a child, and especially a teenager, this can be a source of great trouble, especially inner emotional trouble. So yeah, that was my main challenge as a child and a teenager, trying to pretend that I can fit in with normal society.
But so you did try to fit in still, even if you because that's what something I can relate to. That I felt like I just wasn't conformist naturally, because you talked about how some people almost subconsciously just seem to go along with the group, sort of. And I felt like I never did that by default, but you still, especially as a teenager, you want to fit in, so you might try in certain ways. I just talked about yesterday, you know, this with music, that I have kind of a strange relationship to music, that I'm musical, and I went to music school and I like to participate in music, but I never just listened all that much to music. But all my peers, they listened to kind of the same artists, and they knew the songs and the lyrics, so I kind of tried to listen to music just to keep up, you know, but it didn't come naturally to me at all.
Yeah. Well, of course, as a child, I don't think I was that much concerned to fitting in. But as a teenager, which is a usual pattern, I was far more self-conscious about it, and I tried my best to fit in with the stupid modern teenage culture, like going to nightclubs and all that stuff, right? And I just remember doing silly stuff, like getting too drunk, because personally I cannot even begin enjoying myself in a place such as a nightclub without being extremely high on some sort of substance. So what's natural to do? Like, if you want to fit in, okay, I don't like it, I must pretend to like it because I want to be popular, I want to perhaps make up with a girl or something. So I'm going to get high as fuck and hope for the best. And obviously some of the situations I got myself into due to that were not ideal. I'm surprised I'm still alive to this day.
Were you that crazy?
Well, yeah, of course. I mean, there was a time where, other than smoking pot and consuming alcohol, I would consume MDMA, ecstasy, a little bit of cocaine as well. At some point I got myself connected with some people that were not the best of characters as well, and you know how it is, like you need to prove yourself to the pact that you're edgy, you're extreme, that you are viral in the masculine sense. And I want to say in a toxic masculine sense, because that's like a feminist terminology, which is usually weaponized in a way which is not objective. But both feminine and masculine traits can have toxic and negative expressions.
When you move away from the whole feminist paradigm,
So in the sense, I got myself into companies where the more destructive aspects of masculinity were expressed, and if you express them in a manner which seemed intense, you were rewarded by the company, by their other friends for it. Like, oh, you did this, you are aggressive, you drive dangerously while being intoxicated with God knows what. That's so cool.
Really?
No, it isn't. But at the time, yes, a lot of people in my cycle seem to be a cool thing to do.
Okay, so and so what I forget to ask people this, but I'm quite interested. I see a sort of pattern with many people, that there's some kind of turning point. And for me, it was such an obvious one that I hit this, like my typical origin story with the panic attacks, and it was a very clear turning point. I see that it doesn't happen to everyone in such a dramatic fashion always. But when would you say that you started going in a better direction, and kind of what did that look like?
As soon as my high school ended. So the thing is, even before starting school, somehow there was an inner reaction, subconscious reaction against going to the school. I did not know obviously what I would face, but I think intuitively my childhood consciousness was able to pick up, I'm going to go into some sort of process that is going to last long, that is not going to be aligned with my true nature. Child Odysseas was right. So as soon as my high school ended, and I had like 1 year in between before going to the army, because in Greece it is mandatory to go to the army. For the first time in years, I was 17 at the time, I felt I had a breathing space to just focus on things which solely interest me. It's solely has to do with me, without caring whether, you know, I'm gonna study it to get a good mark, or whether it is acceptable or approved by my peers. For the first time in years, I was able to just focus on my inner self in an authentic way. And during that time, I remember I had many questions regarding the psychological makeup of a human being, what makes us behave in certain ways. I had many questions regarding myself, also about the behavioral patterns of my parents. And I began studying psychology a lot. And the next step after that, after developing a basic understanding of contemporary psychology, you know, understanding a bit of Freud, Adler, Jung, and then the behavioral approaches of more contemporary psychological methods, I rebuilt my sense, or to be more precise, I began appreciating again religiosity. So when I was a small child, I always appreciated Christianity, religion, not in a dogmatic way, because as I said, my family was not dogmatic about anything. They were not dogmatic about Christianity, nor about being an atheist, not about anything. But I had like a connection with what was called God. But when I was a teenager, I began seeing some like spots in the religious narrative which made no sense whatsoever to my mind, and I became a militant atheist, like not simply agnostic or not caring that much about religion and God or whatever, like a militant atheist. I was aggressive towards any expressions of Christianity, God or whatever. Like if anybody said, I believe in God, I would say, you're stupid.
Yeah,
like,
I was the same.
Yeah. Which was part of my teenage rebellion. And, you know, it was justified in part, but obviously there's some falsity in that reaction as well. Like it is justified in the sense that the lower expressions of religiosity, whether it is Christianity or any other religious form, are indeed nonsensical.
Yeah.
They are perhaps useful fairy tales at best, but many times they are also destructive. But with psychology, I opened up again to the idea that perhaps there might be something more to that. And more specifically, the reason I began contemplating this was a book I was reading at that time, where it described the qualities and characteristics of people who seem to have the best psychological health. And one of those aspects were that people that seem to have an emotional equilibrium and they are the best expressions of psychological health, they have a faith, they have an inner sense of being connected to something greater than themselves, greater than their individuality. And they are religious in that sense. And I was thinking, okay, perhaps there's something there, because I'm not feeling completely great. I feel that there's something missing in my self. So why not begin studying religiosity, spirituality again, but from a completely another standpoint, not from the fundamentalist religious standpoint, where people just they do follow certain traditions blindly without examining whether those traditions are true or not. But from the standpoint of what's best for the health of a human being.
I see. And let's, I'm trying to, but just think what I want to go over and how to get there, sort of. But I guess we can talk a bit about, because I know you want to. I want to hear about how you started getting into the physical side of things, also. And I know one thing you mentioned you might want to talk about is kind of redefining fitness, making it something a bit wider, more inclusive, or how you want to call it. But I guess we can tell the story a little bit of how we met each other leading up to that. So, I mean, the people that follow me, of course, know I have this sort of also holistic perspective on fitness. I do what I call holistic bodybuilding. But so I came to a point in my life when I felt like I want to try living somewhere else, basically. I've traveled quite a bit, but I've always lived in the same place. And to make the long story short, I ended up deciding on Greece for several reasons. But where I picked in Greece, I just knew that I lived close to Athens, but it was almost just randomly, almost like taking a map and going like, okay, this place. I just found a good living situation in
the divination.
Yeah, yes. But because I also know that I'm someone that if I try making the best logical decision, I could spend way too much time on it. So I'd rather just pick somewhere, and if it's not good, I'll change when I'm there, you know. But I ended up staying in this small village, I guess, called Saronida, and it's very small. And I just go there. And I integrate myself, and I start knowing some people on the beach, and I told them about me and what I do, and they just mentioned a few times that you should meet our friend Odysseas. He's really a lot like you.
At that time, you were also presenting yourself a lot like at the Solar Night.
The Solar Night, exactly. Yeah. And one thing that can be fun to mention is that because of that, I had gotten this wooden sword at home that I really didn't do any official, real sword training, but I would use it a lot to just play around and do little, I guess, mobility drills, but also honestly just kind of playful movements with a sword.
Yeah, just to give a context to the audience, and the reason why people connected you with me is because they knew that I have a connection with Apollo as a spiritual archetype, and at that time,
the sun god.
Yeah, I'm still practicing actually historical sword fencing.
Yes.
So whenever they saw you and you present yourself at the Solar Night with a wooden sword, they were thinking, of course, that guy reminds me of Odysseas.
yeah, exactly. But so is it called Lent that? I don't know, holiday, or that is 6th, 7th?
Lent, yes. No, are you referring to the 6th of January? Or?
Yeah, yes.
No, that's not a Lent. That's
is that Fotini Day, or?
I don't even know how to call this in English. We call this Theophania. In Greek, it's the celebration of the Greek Orthodox Church, of the baptism of Jesus Christ in the River Jordan.
Okay, and for that event, suddenly you showed up there in Saronida, and we started talking. I don't remember about everything now, but I remember that quite quickly we were also talking about searcher lifts. I'm like, this guy knows searcher, you know, and these other people.
My kind of guy.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Oh, this guy likes to lift heavy in his elbows. My kind of guy. But I had.
I'm sorry. We have to pause here because you're also wearing a special shirt.
Oh yeah.
The Circle Lord and Savior of mankind and of gods also. Kyriakos Grizzly, we pay our respects.
Yeah, and I know we mentioned him then immediately also, and it's like he knows about him. Awesome. He is of course Greek. But they had not told me, the other people, about the sword thing. But I had gotten, actually, it was from an older guy called Thassos that I just talked with in the area. Okay. He had a really nice wooden stick when he was walking with his dog. And I mentioned to him that I had the wooden sword at home, and he got me another stick.
That's so kind of him.
Yeah, and so when we started talking about the sword, you taught me some moves immediately there, and so I think it was the Saint Theodore stance, even with the.
Yes, Saint Theodore. Yes. So there's one particular movement which is based on the iconographies of a saint of the Greek Orthodox Church who is named Theodore, and he's usually, in this position, right? So there's a one-armed carved sword, and he's in this position, ready to cut a head, basically. And I told you the Saint Theodore's stance and cat.
Yeah, and you know, what was quite, this is one of those moments when you don't really believe in chance anymore, you know, because I already feel that what I do is quite unusual, and I just go to this small place, very randomly picked in Greece, and I manage to come across you, you know, it's like...
A karmic meeting.
Yes. And one funny aspect to mention also is that in the gym I went to in Odysseas, which is like, well, it's like 5 kilometers away or something, I got to know another guy a bit later after this, and his name is Dimitris. And I noticed this guy also, he was training, obviously he's a kickboxer, but he was also a very spiritual guy, I noticed when I started talking to him. And then I think the second or third, fourth time I met him and he gave me a ride home, I mentioned this guy that I met, Odysseas, and he was like, wait a minute. He pulled out his phone and was like, is it this guy? And again, it's like too good to be true. You know? I meet these two guys independently of each other. Again, this kind of unusual combo about being into not only the physical but the spiritual. And you know each other also. And there's seemingly no relation to how I met the both of you, right? So that was quite cool. But so, of course, we ended up...
And this is called synchronicities in the Carl Jungian terminology as well.
Exactly.
It's an interesting phenomenon.
We're on the same frequency somehow. And yeah, somehow sent out the signal and got connected.
It does say a lot about the nature of the mind and its relation to what we call the cosmos, right?
Oh yeah, but so we during my time in Greece, we would beat up every once in a while. You would do some sword practice, we'd have a workout, and we traveled to Evia, and where it's actually, you know, because that was also, that's also a cool thing about you. I haven't like hyper specialized on the cold, but I've been into the cold and doing cold plunging and that. And I noticed immediately there in Greece that Greeks are really not very fond of the cold.
The worst enemy of the Greek is the cold.
Yeah.
Like some would believe, the Turks are the nemesis of the Greeks. No. The cold is the worst enemy a Greek can imagine, trust me.
Exactly. Because, you know, I would often, in the mornings in Salonida, I would often go for a swim and then go maybe to the store to pick up some food, and they would see my wet hair and like, oh, you go winter swimming? And to me it was like, well, it's like 14 degrees in the water.
It's still summer in Swedish standards.
Yeah, exactly. But of course you are quite into the cold exposure as well,
especially during that time where you met me. At this moment not so much. It's not like I don't do it. Obviously, like recently we went to for some lake swimming at 4 degrees, 3 degrees.
We were in quite long yesterday.
Yeah.
Longer than I usually do, actually.
And I still try to do swimming in extreme cold temperatures because I believe it's an amazing form of exercise. One of the most hardcore forms of strength and endurance training one can do. Because, just to explain, while you are inside extreme cold temperatures, just staying there without dying is a great stress already for your cardiovascular system. And if you add to that the stress of physical movements like swimming, then it's like going for swimming in normal water temperature and having like 20 kilograms of vest of weight in your body and trying to do that. Especially the arms, like you get this sense of they are clay or something, and like they feel like they're 30 kilos or whatever. So yes, cold water training has many benefits, obviously, if you do this smartly. At that time I was very much into the Wim Hof method. I've been to Poland and done the winter retreat of Wim Hof, met the man himself, and I must say that...
I didn't know that.
Oh, you know, really?
No, I just know that you know, you taught me some Wim Hof stuff, but I didn't know that you actually met him and went there.
Of course, yes. He's quite an inspiring presence, Wim Hof. Like, he has an intense positivity that you can't really ignore, and his positivity is contagious. And one of the first things I noticed about Wim's energy is that in the videos of Wim, if you see him, he's always like up and going and has this projection of his energy, very extroverted. And you say, oh, that's a very uplifting guy. And then you meet him in person and you realize that in his videos he's a bit tamed.
That's funny.
Like his energy is like 3 times more intense, which is something unexpected and quite cool. Has an amazing sense of humor, and he's an overall genuine guy. Like he has not lost himself due to him being famous and having done some, to say the least, amazing feats. I remember one particular event while I was with Wim Hof and the rest of the company, the boys that were gathered there in the sauna. And we were just having a talk, and one of my friends asked Wim, so Wim, can you get it up inside the cold water? and Wim responded to that, oh, not only I can get it up, I can make it snow. And being that famous and responding to a question like that in such a way, without giving any regards of whether this will be known and somehow it's going to ruin your public image, I think this is a lot about him.
Yeah, he seems, I have never followed him closely, but I've followed him just a little bit for a long time, and he seems like, well, I guess almost quite literally a very chill guy. Like, like I can imagine that, no, my impression is that fame has definitely not got into his head at all. No, but I wanted to say there's actually a video of that, so I'll link that in the description in this episode, but we went to Evia. Because in most places in Greece there's not going to be all that much snow, but we went to a part, at the time of the year also.
There's an asterisk to that though, because most people, when they're thinking of Greece, they're thinking of the islands and the lower altitudes of Greece. As a matter of fact, every year in Greece you have snow. It's on the mountain part of Greece, which is not like a small part of Greece. Most of Greece is covered by mountains. So it's not that unusual to find snow in Greece. It's just they are in the places where most people don't go.
No, I guess that's what I mean, more like when you think about, because even me, when I moved to Greece, what I'm thinking about is not like the snowy mountains,
Obviously, yes.
Yeah, but it was since I got to know you, and that was something we started talking about. We waited for the right weather conditions, I think, and then when we first went to just a mountain.
The right weather conditions, meaning the worst weather conditions possible for most people.
Yeah, exactly. No, but the first time we went to some other mountain and just.
The first time, was it somewhere near Saronida?
No, I don't remember where it was. I don't remember the name of it now. But
before we went to Evia, you mean, right?
Yeah, you, me, and Patricius went, and we went up the mountain, but we didn't go super far. But we did it shirtless.
It was in Pedeli.
Pedeli, that's right.
Yes, one of the main mountains in Athens. Yes,
that's right. And then the second time we went to Evia.
But there's a reason why we did not go that far, because the snow was up to here.
Yeah, and I had, you at least had proper boots, because I didn't go to Greece expecting to do something like that. So I had these sneakers that were just completely wet.
That's very Swedish of you.
Yeah, but of course it was kind of the same thing. The other time when we went to Evia, we went quite far in and found this lake.
That was brutal, man.
Oh yeah, it was like maybe 4 degrees in the water then, something like that. We went in, and it was an interesting experience, because many times, I don't know, you feel like you have some kind of safety net when you do something like that. But coming up, and I'm like shivering. I have my wet shoes and socks. Just getting them all back on was a struggle.
But the thing is, the challenge was not actually going to the lake and having a swim there. That was not so challenging for us, considering the training that we had beforehand. The challenge was that we walked, was it 3 kilometers perhaps, which again is not a long distance, but under the worst conditions possible. Yeah, like the snow up to here, all of our clothes and socks have become wet, and we finally reached that lake. So it took us more than 1 hour to reach that lake, despite the fact that we just walked like 3-5 kilometers at most. And we went inside, and then for the recovery, there was nothing really like substantial to hit us up.
Nope.
Because us to wear back again our wet clothes and then walk back under those conditions to the car.
Yes. But there's something interesting with you know, when you just have to do something, you kind of adapt more than you'd expect. Because I remember when I was, like I said, trying to get the socks on. I'm like, you have to go all the way back. It's like, it seems like such a mountain to climb, metaphorically speaking. But then when we started heading back, you go into almost kind of a trance. It's like, well, this is just what we have to do now. There's no calling a car to pick us up or anything. It's physically impossible there. And then I remember we went to this taverna and ate some lamb, sat by the fire.
Meal, yes. And for those who don't know, Greek taverna is one of the best food experiences one can have in the world.
I think so.
You get perhaps the best value for your money for what you receive as a service and the quality of the food. It's really good.
Yeah.
But you have to go to the right taverna, the Greek village, not just in any taverna. So it's...
Yeah, what I like...
Yes, you need the help of a local sometimes to find the right spot.
You know, what I like is that many times when you go to a restaurant to eat, it's kind of like, order this dish. But on a taverna, it can be a little bit like, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. And you kind of collect a bunch of food on the table and just have a good experience.
Feast.
A feast.
Yeah.
Especially if you're someone that trains and needs a lot of food. It's quite
This
a
is
nice
one of the
thing.
best countries to bulk.
Oh yeah, definitely.
No doubt about it.
But so let's talk a bit about the physical. So just tell me how you got into training and kind of, because I know also even right today you have slightly shifted focus from when I got to know you. But tell me a little bit about that, and then we can kind of come to your view of fitness, or like that you know what I mean.
To tell you how I got into physical training, we have to get back to the previous section of our discussion of you know, the years that were somewhat impactful for me. So about a year before going into that phase where I reconnected with spirituality and religiosity, I started doing physical training for no other reason, just for me to begin feeling better for myself.
Perfect.
Like
that's the best reason to do it.
Yeah, at that time I was feeling just a lot of rage about a lot of things in my life. You know, you're a teenager, perhaps you don't have the best relationship with your parents, and you don't have the ideal situation at school and with your peers as you would like to. And on top of that, perhaps you have some troubles with your subjects in class and so forth. It seems like you have a bunch of challenges to deal at once while you are a teenager at times. So I just wanted an outlet to just take off some of that rage outside of me. And I began very humbly doing physical training by buying one of those pull-up bars you can place at your door. And just
it's funny because that's exactly how even though I started later, that's exactly how I started also.
Yeah. Like, you know, I get teary-eyed whenever I think about that pull-up bar.
Yeah. Mine was more duct tape than pull-up bar at the point. It just broke down so much.
Nice. Do you still have it?
I don't think so. I think I got rid of it when I moved.
Oh, no.
I know it's sentimental value or something, but...
This is a holy object, man.
Where the first gains were made, yeah.
The gains, yeah. And yeah, and I just did for the sake of getting some of that anger out. But then I realized that I'm actually pretty good at it. And I remember that after a few months of training, of doing mostly pull-ups, push-ups, and some swimming, and perhaps a little bit of running, I began receiving the first comments of, oh, I mean, you look quite athletic. And that was a nice change for me, because as I said, I was bullied at some point due to my stature, my small stature, and not being physically strong. And then for the first time in my life, people were commenting, "Oh, you look strong." I'm like, "Oh, that's nice." Yes. And this motivated me further to train. And of course, there is superficiality in that, right? Because you're at a point in your life where you're still grounding your sense of value of how others perceive you. But it was very important for me at that time.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't think there's, you know, we talk about balance, that of course, ideally you do a thing like this for yourself to feel good and be your best self and that, but we are social beings, interdependent beings, to use a word you would often do. So, I mean, it's not like there's nothing to at least appreciating. Like, what I always say is that it shouldn't be your main driver to train, that you want other people to tell you that you look good, but there's nothing wrong with appreciating the fact that when you get that kind of feedback.
Well, there's nothing wrong to appreciate that fact, with an asterisk again, because if you're putting too much emotional value when you receive positive feedback, you're probably going to do the same when you're going to receive negative feedback. And that taken to the extreme leads to body dysphoria.
Yeah.
Right? Which is, I think, a mental disorder that many people have in the fitness industry.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, you know.
I mean, it's funny because I joke about it. Like, I think for me, I reached a point where I'm just happy enough with my body that nothing can really make me feel too bad. But I noticed that you get still a kind of a skewed, even if you don't go around feeling insecure about it or something, you get kind of a skewed view. Like, you kind of only notice the people that you think are better than you, somehow, like, oh, that guy's arms or something, you know. And
the thing is, our big, beautiful brain is amazing, has amazing capacities. But due to evolutionary reasons, there are some biases in our brains which are not that beneficial, especially for a modern day man. And it has to do that there is a tendency towards a negative, towards a bias of focusing more on negative events with our brains. Why? Because it was very useful to do our evolutionary development to focus more on be careful when things go wrong, because you might die due to a mistake or due to of another male being stronger than you, than actually just appreciating good things.
Yeah.
Now, it was more useful for many years, right? It's only quite recently in the evolutionary development of man that it's not that important to focus on these things, and you have to somehow skillfully change your brain towards another direction, which appreciates more, you know, how things simply are. You don't have to fight for your survival, like go hunting and kill other tribesmen anymore, right? So you can relax. You don't have to be like the strongest at all situations, otherwise you and your kin might be slaughtered, right? You can relax.
Yeah, but you know, even it's a lot about the brain and the body. It's like it doesn't really care if you feel good or are having a good time. You know, it cares more that you survive. And sometimes, in order to survive, you don't necessarily have to feel happy, like even being afraid, or But please, so a bit more about the training. Like, I guess you can. I know you've shifted away a bit from the sort of powerlifting training, but how did you get into that? And you can tell everyone how strong you are.
Well, as I said, one of my main drives to go into strength training to begin with, other than the outlet to let out of my rage, was the sense that I need to feel that I'm strong, and for others to recognize that I'm strong as well. So it's natural that I got myself involved more into training which increases limit strength. So I did a lot of deadlift, not so much bench press. I did not really like bench press.
It's kind of boring, actually.
Yeah. I mean, I did that.
It's not a bad lift,
but it did not excite me the way squat and deadlift did. And I did also other stuff, like you remember training with me, like a lot of weighted calisthenics as well.
That's,
right?
I was going to say one of the things that stood out to me with you were the weighted chin-ups. You're quite strong at those.
Yeah, heavy kettlebell training as well. Like I have the monster kettlebells of 18, 90 kilograms.
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of heavy swings. And when it came to like the strength exercise that resonated most with me was the deadlift. And I was able to reach 240 kilograms on deadlift. Obviously natural. I don't think it's something that impressive when it comes to like powerlifting standards, right? Perhaps like 20 years ago it would have been quite impressive. At around 83 kilograms to deadlift 240 kilograms, right? But nowadays it's like, okay, that's definitely way above average, but meh.
There's some 16-year-old pulling 300 kilos somewhere out there.
Those fucking Zoomers, I hate them. Yeah, that's my point. So I don't really think that I reached like an elite level of strength or whatever, but I did my best considering that I was never a professional athlete. It was never like the entirety of my life. It was a creative hobby that I invested much time into it. And well, yes, I did had a considerable amount of strength. But I shifted to my focus on my training because after some point, you know, I realized that although I do enjoy this type of training, there are so many other things I want to do.
Yeah.
And I was not a teenager anymore, so it's not like it was important for me to be recognized as being strong. Like, okay, I've grew up. I don't have to get too attached to those things anymore. And since I was not competing, and I contemplated about competing, but I chose not to, because the thing about training is that you have a finite amount of time and energy to invest to have a finite set of benefits and effects through your training. And if you want to, for example, be the competitive at powerlifting, then you have to really focus on the three main lifts.
Yeah.
And after some point, if you get too good in a certain activity, this means that it will have detrimental effects on other physical activities. And I was observing that doing too many deadlifts, especially, that I was becoming too stiff. Like, okay, it was quite useful in free weight training and doing other stuff like heavy chin-ups, but when it came to martial arts, for example, it was actually a barrier that, despite the fact I was stronger than anybody else, or most of the times I train with, like I would go, let's say, to a kickboxing club and I was the strongest individual in the room, this did not translate into the training itself. On the contrary, it was something that held me back. And I'm not saying that I just changed my focus on training or simply focusing on limited strength just due to that, because I wanted to develop martial arts skills. It's just that through martial arts, those limitations that are self-imposed on my body were made quite apparent. And then it made me rethink what is more important for my physical training at this moment in time. And I concluded that I want to have a more holistic type of strength, which obviously it's not like I don't care about limited strength anymore. I do care, but not on a point where increase in limited strength decreases my flexibility or my endurance, right? And also that's very important, my capacity to perform complicated movement patterns. Because if you do dancing or martial arts or any other activity, physical activity, like any other sport, for example, that requires some form of agility, like after some point, being too good at free weight training or any other form of strength training limits you severely. And I was thinking, since I'm not competing, what's the point of, deadlifting 240 kilograms if this does not translate into other activities which I find quite valuable, like dancing with my partner, punching someone, right?
Yeah. Okay. But so let's get to your. You talked about that. Your how you kind of wanted to expand the view of fitness, or maybe your branch of fitness, or like you know what I'm getting at. So please present kind of what that would include. Your practice would include.
Well, we began this discussion by saying that I'm a holistic physical therapist, and that kind of resonates with the philosophy of Hippocrates, but generally speaking, the ancient philosophical Greek view as well. So nowadays, the contemporary Western mindset sees things in a fragmented ways. So this is fitness and this is not. This is right and this is left. This is black and this is white. In a dualistic sense.
Yeah.
And doing that, although it makes you very proficient in specific activities or a specific form of knowledge, it does not cultivate wisdom, because wisdom is integrative. So when it comes to fitness, if you compare and contrast the contemporary Western approach into physical training and the approach to physical training some Far Eastern traditions have, like for example Tai Chi, traditional Kung Fu, one will observe that in contemporary Western forms of physical training, there is again this emphasis on the specificity. Like for example, you're going to become a very proficient powerlifter. You just focus on that, and this is fitness. But if you want to have a good mental health, then there seems not to be like a talk about physical training. You go to a psychotherapist and talk about your emotional issues. But in the ancient Greek view, which in a way it's still kind of alive, the principle at least, in these Far Eastern Asian traditions, there's no such fragmented way of thinking. If you want to get emotional well-being, you will also focus in some sort of physical training, and the physical training itself is also integrated with mental training, meditation, and high spirituality. Like all those aspects are combined into one. And therefore I was thinking, and it's not like my mental vision about this reconceptualization of fitness is complete or quite clear, but I was thinking that perhaps we can begin reconceptualizing fitness in a similar way, not necessarily exactly the way that it is seen in Tai Chi, for example, but in a non-fragmented way. So in the West, whenever we think about fitness, usually we think about what it means to become bigger, stronger, faster. And perhaps now this has expanded a little bit, which includes other forms of strength, and there's also a lot of talk lately about what is functional training, functional strength and all that, and how you should also train in various planes of movements, not only in the sagittal plane and all that, which is good. And there's also some talk about mental training as well, especially in sports. But again, this is limited compared to how physical cultivation was seen in traditional wisdom, such as in ancient Greek philosophy, or to what I mentioned just earlier about the Far Eastern traditions, which are still alive today. Because it does not include questions such as, you're big and strong and perhaps fast as well and all that, and that's good, and you also have like mental focus to have performance in your sport, but how much emotional well-being does your body have? How much bliss can your body cultivate and experience? How much harmony does your body manifest? These are not questions which are even considered whenever the subject of fitness comes up in the West. And in a way, one might say, why should those questions be considered? Like, if I want to feel better, I'll just focus a little bit on psychology, or if I want spirituality, I won't think about fitness, I will think about religion, right? Well, that's the thing though, that is a subconscious bias of modern Western thinking, that it did not exist in traditional wisdom. It did not exist certainly in ancient Greece, and I would say also in the traditional European soul as well. It was not a kind of thinking that was inherent to Western mindset before the dualism that Descartes began, which I don't know if you're aware of. Descartes talked about the soul and the spiritual world being one line, and the material world being one parallel line, which does not ever meet.
No,
Right?
I've never heard about that, but yeah, okay.
Well, it has to do with the beginnings of rationalism in the West, which this is a relatively recent event in Western history. And because the Western Enlightenment, the Western rationalism did not emerge in the Far East, you can still find, paradoxically, fragments of wisdom that existed in the West, still in the Far East, that it is mostly lost in the West. And just to conclude for now my thesis, my presentation of why perhaps it is beneficial for fitness to be reconceptualized in certain ways, is that we can get back to that today. It doesn't have to be, something which one must find into exotic lands. It is part of the Western soul to experience physical cultivation in a non-fragmented way. It is part of our tradition as well. We just forgotten about it. And if one wants to become a whole human being, perhaps it is more beneficial to see fitness in such a way where, yes, you can focus on particular aspects of fitness on a skill, but not neglect that this particular aspect or skill must be integrated into a whole, a whole human being, a whole anthropos, to be complete. Because what's the point of becoming like a very successful athlete or very successful bodybuilder or whatever if you are unhappy or unhealthy? And the other time we were discussing about this before our podcast, I mentioned the example of Michael Phelps. Michael Phelps is by all means a dream athlete. Like if somebody reads his biography, it's like a dream story of an athlete, the most celebrated Olympic athlete, a swimmer of all times. He had all these gold medals. He's successful and beautiful and rich and got recognition. Like, by all means, one would imagine that Michael Phelps was the most blissful man in the world. Nevertheless, he almost killed himself due to suicide. He almost suicided because he was feeling so depressed.
Yeah.
So despite the fact that he was extremely successful, that he had realized what most people try to pursue into fitness and in the sports world, he was extremely miserable. And I think there's a lot of value, didactic value in that, what others can learn through it. that perhaps the way we see fitness and limit fitness is self-destructive, after all, because we see it in a fragmented way. And, you know, there can be a criticism into that, for example, a lot of people will say, well, yes, Tai Chi, they do not see physical cultivation in a fragmented way, but if a Tai Chi practitioner tries to fight an MMA fighter, the MMA fighter will kick his ass, right, in the fight, which it has a point, right? So although I do think that we can begin discussing some sort of reconceptualization of fitness, I do not think that we should throw away the baby along with the bathwater. I think it is good that in the West we can focus on the exterior result in a way that perhaps other cultures do not do, and have a superior exterior result. Nevertheless, when this superior external result, this focus on external results, bring about this misery inside of us, at the end of the day, it's not worth it.
Yeah. So if someone now was like, well, that sounds great, Odysseas, like I agree, but what do I do now though? Like I'm into strength and hypertrophy training, for instance. What should I add in addition to that, or what should I kind of change or adjust about what I do? If we just try to be a little concrete about the whole thing.
Well, that's a good question. Well, first of all, I would be more intentional in my physical training. So before doing your physical training, I would generate in my mind a certain intention that, okay, I'm going to go and grow in strength, my physical strength, but not just because for the sake of it, but put it into a wider spiritual context. And this context might be, for example, like I want to become stronger physically to increase my mental strength as well. And why? Because I want to be more of a benefit not only for myself, but also for those whom I love. That is a good intention to have, for example, an aspiration, and people might not put too much value into those aspirations, but whenever you do this again and again, it actually changes your neurological circuits. It's like a prayer, and one of the reasons those things work is because whenever you do something repetitively, it creates new neural pathways, and this just changes the way you perceive yourself and the world.
Yeah.
So if you do that before every strength training session, you set this type of positive intentions, it's going to affect you in ways that go beyond just growing in strength. That's one thing. The other thing is that perhaps you should invest some time into doing things that physical, I mean, that are just not solely related to strength, but includes other aspects like getting in touch with your breathing, getting in touch with the subtle aspects of your nervous system. So you may do, let's say, deadlifts, but after your training session you might invest perhaps not too much time, even 5 minutes is enough. Invest time in some form of breathing meditation or some form of Tai Chi movements. The same thing is true if one wants to do kickboxing, for example. Yeah, do that very intense form of exercise. But the thing is, and the thing we also have discussed this in our private talks, is that the way one physically trains affects the entirety of your psychological makeup. And the thing is, if somebody over-focuses on, let's say, strength training with free weights, not only he will become more rigid in the body, but this rigidness will translate into his psychological interpersonal relationships as well. And perhaps this is a little bit of pro-science, although I do believe it can be also
Spirituality is bro science.
yeah, evidence-based as well. That, but yeah, the same thing is true if you do, let's say, a lot of violent sports. It's not like that form of energy of being violent will remain just in your training. If you're not careful, if you do not have some outlets to bring more balance in your energy, it will also be carried over in other areas of your life. So it's good to be mindful of that and try to find balance between the masculine and the feminine, between the hard and the soft, the yin and the yang, and so forth.
Yeah, you know, first thing I think of is, it is very interesting that when you just have an intention to do something, because I asked you, like, how does one do that? And you kind of, that was the first thing you said, that maybe you set the intention that I do this not only to get physically stronger, but for this and this reason. That, because I make this analogy sometimes, it's like, how, if you're going to tell someone, how do you learn to ride the bike? There's no direct instruction for that. You're just going to have to kind of have an intention to try to learn, and suddenly something's going to click and now you can ride the bike. It's kind of the same thing when you have that sort of intention. It's like, well, just try to make it that way and gradually do that, and you're going to notice that something happens with you. The other thing is that, you know, one thing that I do is that I use my training as a way of kind of understanding myself as outside of training also, but also to shape myself outside of training, because you said that. So to take some examples, I notice when I train that I tend to push myself too hard rather than the other way around, that I overexert myself and I might actually cause harm to myself. That's counterproductive to what I'm trying to accomplish, because if I harm myself, I won't be able to do what I want to do. And then I saw that maybe I have the tendency in other aspects of my life. And also I've noticed that I can rush things a little bit, not necessarily ego lift. I'm sure I've done a little bit of that, but you know, cut the range of motion a bit short, because I just want to move that weight so much. I notice maybe I'm moving too hastily in my life sometimes, you know. So I both use my training as a way to kind of observe and spot things about myself, but I also see that if I change how I go about things in the gym, I also change myself just as a person.
So my sword-facing teacher says that depending on how one talks, this is translated into his sword-facing style as well. So if somebody is a big talker, he usually is very, mobile and does a lot of movements while he's sparring with his sword fencing. While if somebody is a bit more laconic in his talk, he will have more subtle movements and just move only when it is absolutely necessary. The style will change a lot. So that's also a nice analogy, sword fencing analogy to what we are discussing.
Yeah.
And well, there are many things one can do to actualize what I'm saying. But the problem with that is that it requires a change in paradigm. So the first step, other than the simple things that I mentioned before, for one to do is to perhaps contemplate what the mind is. So we talk about the mind a lot in the YouTube communities, also in scientific communities, but even in scientific discourses, the question what the mind is, it's often neglected question, and it's assumed that we do agree what the mind is, but it's a big discussion which definitely there's no consensus whatsoever about it. Now, in the West, there is this tendency to equate the mind with the head brain, right? And this is called the brain monism, equating that the mind is simply a being residing in our brain, inside our skulls, and whatever we experience through our minds is solely related to that. And this is a bias that was quite prevalent in the scientific community for decades, in modern times. Now, just like with fitness, which was quite limited and fragmented at the beginning and now it begins to expand, the definition of the mind in the West also has changed over the decades gradually. And at the beginning it expanded into the notion that perhaps it's not only our head brain that has a lot of neural information that creates our mind experience, but hey, there's a lot of neurons as well in our gut as well, into our heart as well. It's one might say therefore that because there are so many neurons in the gut, that you can talk about a gut brain as well, or a heart brain also. And now in some scientific circles this concept has expanded even more, saying that the mind also has some interpersonal aspects. So perhaps it's not only that the mind is not limited to the head brain, it's not only that there are other brains in our physical body, in the rest of our physical body, so one might even talk about an embodied mind, that our physical body is an embodied mind, but there are also interpersonal aspects of the mind which goes beyond the physical body itself. For example, right now there is a conduit of mind energy in this interaction between Odysseas and Theodore and the inanimate object of the camera, and then that mind information as in the personal conduit will expand into the audience as well, right? So this is also mind. You can't say it's not mind. If it's not mind, what it is? But it's not like our physical brain extends into Theodore, into the camera, into the audience, right? So there's something more to that. There's something more to the mind than just its physical aspects. So, in my opinion, although this perhaps might be too philosophical, but if that paradigm does not change, if our understanding of what the mind is does not change, then this won't be translated into the activities we do, whether it is physical training or something else, because we will have this subconscious notion that things are fragmented, instead of understanding that every existence is interconnected, and our minds therefore are also an interconnected pattern that does not just simply exist as an individual being on a vacuum, but it is an integrated whole within a greater integrated whole, which then goes ad infinitum to the universe.
Yeah. That's all very interesting, but I don't know where to go with that exactly. but I guess you're starting to open up, because I wanted to you to talk about more kind of the more pure, spiritual side of you, I guess. I don't quite know where to start with asking you, but this is what I start thinking about now. But you are, of course, you have a more like kind of direct spiritual practice, if you will. Like, I guess your Buddhism is kind of the path through which you practice spiritualism. And so I guess I just wanted you to talk a bit about that and what that is, what all that is to you. Something, expression that I've heard you say many times, talking about upgrading the nervous system, which is something I just find very interesting and like you to talk more about. So I don't have any direct question here, but please, can you present that side of you a little bit?
Well, I have a perennial understanding regarding religiosity and spirituality, which means that I acknowledge that all relative forms of religiosity and spirituality arise from a primordial unity that transcends relative doctrine and relative forms of religiosity. That being said, I do follow a specific path, a specific spiritual path, which is related to Vajrayana Buddhism. And Vajrayana Buddhism is basically mainly expressed through Tibetan Buddhism. That means through the religious organization of the Dalai Lama. Yeah. And Well, I'm not sure what you want to learn about this path. It is a broad subject, but if I am to connect them more to the main subject of our talk, which is physical cultivation, is that because one, possibly through following a Buddhist path, or not necessarily, just having a broader understanding of the mind, then through that understanding, it will have a carryover in whatever he does. In the context of physical training, he will see it through an integrated whole, that this is an activity which is just affects my mind directly, because the mind is also, as we said before, embodied mind. So whatever I do here will be translated in all aspects of my life. And if I am to be a holistic human being and have a wholesome health, I also need to train wholesomely. I need to train in a wholesome way. I need to train in a way which is not solely limited to, for example, developing my PR, my deadlift. And perhaps I might need to include some other things. Well, we did mention that one can also do some breathing meditation to calm his nervous system after an intense strength training session. We also did mention that one can include in his training body meditation like Tai Chi, which makes him into touch with the parts of the nervous system which is not usually accessible through gross movements. And this can be a surprising experience to some. Just sitting down, relaxing, and feeling their body in a way which they haven't before in the past. It's amazing what one can unlock through simply diving deep inside with a subtle, peaceful movement. And well, one main issue is that people don't have enough time in their lives anymore. That's one problem, because I can say a lot of things of what one can do. Like you can include perhaps some form of training which includes complex movement patterns like dancing. So if you can do that alongside, alongside your physical training, that's amazing. And then you can also include one aspect in your physical training which has to do with affecting the autonomic nervous system through breathing, such as the Wim Hof method, for example, which is also very good. Then you can add to that some sort of training which has to do solely with the mental aspect of your mind and how it relates with physical movement. This can be something like Qi Gong, like Tai Chi. And then to add to that, you can have also a sort of contemplative training, like sitting meditation, right? And so all those things add up to what we're saying. And I'm not sure how this can be integrated to its life of the individual, right? Because it's something very relative and subjective. But my main point is that it's good for people to begin considering those things.
Yeah.
So if somebody is into powerlifting, and then at some point you realize, oh, I'm not exactly feeling happy, despite the fact that I'm hitting PRs, or perhaps even if somebody is quite talented, I'm a successful powerlifter, he might realize that there's still a vacuum, a gap inside of his heart, his soul, his mind. And perhaps that's because he still views himself and how he can achieve happiness in a fragmented way. So my suggestion for him is to perhaps begin redefining fitness into his mind, to begin contemplating how can I increase the capacity of my body to have happiness. That's one sense that this can be helpful, this redefinition of fitness. Perhaps it would be better if we include like concrete examples to make it more.
I mean, I
healthy.
always like the kind of general overview because hopefully people can watch or listen something, and you know, it's more like it's almost like inspiration. Hopefully that makes their mind go a certain place and they can figure something out themselves. But absolutely, it's always good to be able to give concrete examples also.
Do you have something in mind that you want to mention?
I mean, so related to this, I'm not sure what I was thinking about a little bit, because you said that it could be, you know, people don't have time and it can look a little bit different for different people. Something I've thought about lately is that, I think I even spoke about it in a video, that to me a spiritual, what is being spiritual, you know? And one thing I concluded is kind of like being present with your experience is quite a spiritual thing, and I think that many people just are not these days, you know, distracted, either just because we're stressed, they have lots going on, but we kind of escape our own experience through different devices and even screens, you know. So when I just think about little things that I do, for instance, are just things like just catching myself when I go into those things. And for instance, I've taken this example so many times, but even doing mundane things and being very present with it. So I've taken the example of washing the dishes. An impulse for a modern person can be to like put a podcast on or something, you know, while you do, because you can, right? But sometimes I just decide that I'm just going to be present with this experience here right now. And you know, I do a meditation. I've the kind of meditation I've done is very, you know, you remember the silent prayer we did from Jesse Lee Peterson? That's something that I do, just kind of, it's kind of just being present with yourself almost, and just noticing what's going on the inside, so you can kind of just get to know.
Yes, but I was just thinking that we discussed like the general overview of the idea, but it's better to somehow connect it to something more concrete with examples, like what kind of issues your clients might face that might be related with spirituality, and how can we integrate this new approach into fitness that we suggested into their situation. Obviously, you don't have to mention specific names or whatever, like present personal information, but something more like a more concrete situation of how we can apply what we discussed in a concrete way.
Yeah, well, when I think about specifically the clients I work with, it's you know, often I have broadly I have kind of two types of clients. Some are just kind of ready to go. You know, it's like, oh well, you clearly have the information I need to kind of get the kind of results that I'd want. So yeah, just tell me what to do and I'll do it. But then the other kind, broadly again, is people are kind of like, I know what I should be doing, kind of. You know, I've watched many YouTube videos, I have lots of information, but I kind of find myself still unable to do it, you know. And so it becomes sort of a thing of figuring out the person and why they are struggling to get the things done, you know. But I don't know that I have a good example.
Okay. All right. Well.
But I often prescribe a thing like meditation and journaling.
All right. Let's take, for example, the average gym goer. And from my experience as a physical therapist, I would say that the average gym goer is somebody who has time to invest during the week, perhaps 2 to 3 sessions of going there, perhaps of 1 hour and 15 minutes, something like that. And beyond this point, there's not really too much time to invest into fitness. Now, this is just an average situation, so it won't resonate to most. So in those cases, what I would suggest in those people is, first of all, to do some form of physical training that it brings joy into them. So it doesn't have to be necessarily going to the gym, right? It does have to be that an activity that they heard it's good for their health, but they do not really enjoy it. It doesn't really resonate with them. So that's like the first step. I would suggest to them to find something that they just like to do.
Yeah.
And although it might sound too simple, I think that's like the first baby step into seeing fitness in a more spiritual way. Instead of trying to focus on an external result that you want to manifest, just begin by what kind of physical movement I enjoy doing.
Yeah.
That's one thing. Now, let's say that person decides to do some form of 5x5 lifting training, right?
Sure.
I was okay, that's cool, that's perfect. We can discuss about the details of how to technically be precise and efficient with that type of training. But then I would suggest for him, because it includes a lot of free weight movement and training, if you're not careful, you might become too rigid in your body. If you do not counteract this with some other form of training which increases a lot of flexibility, and this might be yoga. And now, in this person, perhaps yoga is something that he dislikes, and that's okay. So it's not like I would suggest for him, include like 1 hour session of yoga in your training regimen, but rather after you've done your 1 hour powerlifting training, just include some yoga stretches for 15 minutes to make sure to balance this out. So that's one other thing I would say to him. And then it all depends on time, right? It really all depends on time of what other thing I would suggest to that person. But usually, because there is lack of time, where I focus is mainly on describing the principles and then make the best of the situation of how these principles can be applied in a holistic way in their situation. But I do think that if one understands the principle, then, as you said before, he tends to find his own way.
Yeah.
So perhaps after a while, for example, starting with what we said earlier, that person drops out by doing the 5x5 training session, and because he has embodied that understanding of holistic fitness, he tries to do something completely else that he seems to that he feels like he lacks. For example, something which is more related to martial arts. Does this make any sense? That but for me, it's more important to change the understanding.
Yeah.
And then the practical application of that understanding will be manifested in various ways, which it's difficult to pinpoint of how exactly it can be manifested.
Yeah, no, I agree. It does make sense. But I'm just thinking now, maybe because I think we had a good discussion about it, but to change gears a little bit. Because what I think about sometimes when I do a podcast, especially with someone I know already, it's like we often talk about many interesting things, but some of them are kind of hard to kind of like, I'll ask you a question, and then we just, you see, like even just when we were in the car from the airport, we talked about many interesting things. But so one thing that I thought I can ask you, and that might lead to an interesting discussion, is I asked you once just your take on the trinity of God. And I remember that I thought you gave a really good answer. So if I just ask you that, like, because that's also something I think is, it's something I've thought about more like the last 1 or 2 years or so. But I think it's difficult for many people to grasp. And it's not just from Christianity, of course. So,
well, one can't understand the Trinity without understanding Plato. So one thing that needs to be recognized is that the doctrine of the Trinity arose through the unification of the Christianity of the early Christian age with Hellenism. And of course in Hellenism, Platonism was quite prevalent. And in Plato, there is a discussion about the one. The one being absolute reality, reality as it is. And to not go into very much philosophical details, there is a paradox in the one, that the one cannot be a monad, in the sense a singular monad on its own, otherwise it's not the one. Because the one is not simply a whole, but something that a unity, a simplicity of unity that goes beyond the whole itself. Because if one thinks that the whole is the one, then that person is mistaken, because the whole is a whole because there is also a part. Without a part, there is no whole. So the whole is not the one, but also the part is not the one, because it is a part, like a particular being, not the one. And this is a paradox that I can say in very simplistic terms that Plato recognized. And this is debatable, but it is the belief of many scholars that the conclusion of Plato is that the one is also many, and the many is also one.
Yeah.
And what this means is that in the vision of Plato, he saw reality as fractals. So, for those who don't know, fractals is a geometrical and mathematical structure where there are geometrical shapes that expand into infinity, and those shapes take various forms, infinite forms basically, but in all of those forms one can identify a primary pattern. So in that sense, you might say, if one is to create a visual image in his mind, Platonism saw reality and the one, that Odysseas is one, and Theo is also one, and the external environment is also one, and so on and so on. That this is a unity that is ever transcended. It can't be pinpointed neither as many, neither as a whole. So therefore the one is many and the many is one, paradoxically, right? So based on this principle, the theological problems of the early Christian age regarding the nature and the divinity of Jesus Christ were answered. So Christ is also God. Jesus Christ is fully human and fully God. The God is one, but it's also many. It is a trinity. And then you have all this discussion about the Father, the Spirit, and the Logos, the Word of God, who also incarnated as Jesus Christ. And why Trinity, not a quaternity or whatever else? Now, this again goes back to Hellenism, because the number 3 is the first number right after the 1 that, I'm not sure what's the term in English. So there are the numbers that go are 2, 4, 6.
Yeah, it's an uneven or odd number.
It's the first, exactly, yes. It's the first odd number right after the 1. So it is the return of multiplicity into the source, into the 1. And this is a very ancient teaching. It actually is related with Pythagoras. Pythagoras was the first to give this spiritual meaning and significance to the number 3. So
He liked his triangles.
yeah, that's why the one God in Christianity was first recognized as a trinity, for multiple reasons, which are rooted into Hellenism. The schools of thought and philosophy that one can find its traces into southern Italy, which was Magna Graecia at that time. Then they were further developed and cultivated by Plato, and then during the Roman times where Hellenic philosophy was prevalent and Christianity was on the rise, and then you had theological problems of, is Christ a human or a god? Is he partly God or partly human, and so forth? Then those theological problems were solved through the ancient Greek philosophy and theology, and the Trinitarian doctrine arose.
All right, yeah. You know, the way I do things, you're much more well-read on things than I am. Like, you know history of things better than I do. And what I do is kind of like, when I hear something, like the Trinity, when I just started thinking about it, okay, it's something related to God and the divine. I'm just like trying to make sense of it myself, you know. And what I kind of concluded, I started thinking about it since I started having this more non-dualistic perspective. And to me, it's kind of like, okay, this universe seems to be a universe of separation and duality at once, you know, that all is one, but things are also separate, you know. Like, for instance, you and I, we are two people sitting here. But to me, what makes it three is that there's always a one and a two, but then there's something together with them. So there's you and me.
The personal connection, perhaps, that we discussed earlier about the nature of the mind.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a you and a me, but there's also an us, and that makes it three to me, you know. You see what I mean?
But there's something interesting there that I want to add. I'm not saying that you're saying this, but
sure.
You know, in spiritual circles, you often see that people tend to equate spiritual understanding of neglecting the individuality of one's existence for the sake of the whole, right? Which is wrong in my opinion.
Yeah.
And this is not what Plato will teach. This is not what perhaps most Christians will teach when it comes to their understanding of the Trinity, because in the Trinity, in the Trinitarian union, the individual is not negated. So as you said, it's you, me, and the us. But it's not like the you and me gets negated entirely for the sake of us.
Exactly.
But how often do you see in spiritual circles saying, oh, the ego just does not exist, and it's just the whole.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But what we said before, there's no whole without the part. And without the whole, there's no part. And the unity that transcends both is the one. But it's not like there's no I and there is the one. More so, I am the one, you're the one, this is one, and it goes on forever.
Yeah. Yeah, and what I also see it as is that, you know, because exactly, it's not that you negate the individual, did you say that? But it's like this duality, it does exist, but at the same time as the unity. And to me, that's what makes it three, you know. The easy example is something like that.
But you're also a unity, that's the thing. You are also a unity. It's not like without your interaction with me, you are not a unity.
No.
Yeah, you are a unity, I'm a unity, and the connection we have between us is also a unity. Does it make any sense?
I'm not sure I understand exactly what you mean, but to me this that I do is just an example.
You do not exist without being a unity. The you-ness can't exist without being a unity, because who is Theodore? Is he his arms, his fingers, his feet,
you mean like that?
His thought? There are many individual parts that comes together for Theodore to be.
Oh
right?
yeah. No, okay. Yeah, I get that, absolutely. But just with the Trinity, you know, the way I've interpreted it is this with a unity and duality, that you and I are two separate things, but we are something together also, is what I mean. And so I think good examples of this is something like dark and light. Those are two separate things like that, but there's always something in between that too. If you take white and black and mix them, you have a gray. That's both of them together. So they exist like this, but they exist like that also. And to me, that's the Trinity. And I don't know. It's to me it's just helpful in a way when I just look at the world. It's interesting that unity and duality at once, pretty much. Yeah. Yeah.
That's a trinity.
That's a trinity.
That's a Trinitarian unity.
Yeah. Oh yeah, the one thing about masculine and feminine also. You know, that's kind of the way I see it is almost like the main divide, the duality of the universe, those energies. But when the masculinity and femininity come together, like even like sex, you know, they actually kind of become one, and then they create the third, the child also.
Yeah, exactly. You see those patterns everywhere.
Yeah, that's what I mean. So I think we're reaching a pretty good length of this episode, but I want to ask you before I just end it, that is there anything you'd like to talk about that we haven't talked about yet?
I think we discussed our subjects for the day adequately. We can have another podcast possibly if you want for us to expand in more particular areas. Because obviously we touched upon a lot of issues and subjects which can't really be discussed adequately if we don't have like a theme on the podcast.
Yeah. No, and of course I think many of the guests I had I want to have back at some point. So definitely. This is done typically where I would ask, because many people that I do episodes with are like content creators themselves, like where can we find you? But I guess you're not really on social media at all right now. So
I can provide my email if someone is interested in learning more about the things we discussed, of course. At this point, you know, I do not have like a channel or something like that, but eventually I think I'm going to have some content being posted on a YouTube channel, possibly with my partner, which will be related to holistic spiritual and physical cultivation.
Okay. So, yeah. So we might put an email in the description. But okay, before we go, is there any last thing you want to tell me or the viewers? Don't weaken, maybe.
Well, if I am to pass on one message to the viewers through this video is to not see themselves and the world in a fragmented way, because this will always lead to a sense of voidness, of nihilism, and this is hard to do in contemporary West because we are drowning in a sea of individualism.
Yeah.
And many of the challenges, the inner challenges that we face, are connected to that of trying to reconnect with a primordial unity, which is not something beyond us, it's not something transcendental, but it is simply our own inner luminous nature.
Powerful.
Vielen Dank.
Vielen Dank. Thank you for this one, Odysseas.
Thank you.
See you in the next one, guys. Peace.
Peace.